pounds of bombs. The ground is just shaking. The Germans that it hits on the front line don't know how to react to this. Guys, it's not working right. Don't worry, it's a good time. And so some of the guys are so stunned, they're just captured. This guy's being, searched. His clothes are being taken. We're giving him little half rations, little crackers, biscuits that were actually made and packaged in Graham, North Carolina, sent down the railroad to Wilmington and then over to France. And you can see there's a bunch of German guys. So many guys surrendered and were captured, we couldn't guard them all. Here's one GI. If you can see his face, he's kind of smiling. He's got one M1, and he's guarding a bunch of guys, and they're just smiling and content, saying, you know what? We're good. All right? I'm going to go to Alabama and pick cotton or potatoes or something. And again, these are hardcore Nazis. These weren't like run-of-the-mill Wehrmacht, but after seeing what hit them at St. Lo, they're like, okay, this is it. We're done. For the Allied side, coming in at Caen, still trying to take Caen, is our old friend Bernard Law Montgomery. In the next couple weeks, I'm going to do my best not to be biased, but you guys are not going to like him, all right? He just... Really? That was the best you could do? Leading the American First Army in the middle is Omar Bradley. He's known as the GI General. He was a West Pointer, solid guy, kind of humble, didn't like the prima donna attention that Patton and Montgomery demanded. A solid, just, good old guy, just, doing his thing. And he's normally tactically sound. He's going to make a few mistakes tonight that are going to come back to haunt the Allied Army. And the new player is good old George Patton. Last time we saw George, down in Sicily, he struck the helmet off of a soldier with shell shock. 1942-43, we had no idea what post-traumatic stress was. The British were very good at, I think I told you this last week, from days 0 to 10, you could operate on like a superhuman level. The adrenaline, your hearing, your sight, your smell, you're ready, you were taught, you were ready to go. After that 10th day, however, the human body just quickly drops off. And so the British, every 2 weeks to 20 days, would rotate their men out of combat just for 24, 48 hours. A hot meal, a good night's sleep, and they could go right back into the line. Well, we're Americans. We don't need any of that pansy rest crap. When we start, by God, we're just going to go. And so Patton sees this guy in a medical tent shaking, nerves just from all the explosions going on. He just literally could not control his nerves. Patton says, well, you're a coward. And so he takes his gloves and knocks his helmet off. Screams and yells and hollers. Unfortunately, there are a bunch of newspaper reporters with him, and so that story is broadcast across the country. Patton, the hero of Sicily, is now a wanted man. So he's relieved of command. He believes he's going to get fired. For the last year, he was flown all around the Mediterranean, giving tours to VIPs of ancient battlefields, Carthage, Rome, Greece. And it was interesting because Hitler was terrified of Patton. Hitler believed on almost the same day, both men were shot in almost the same area in World War I. And Patton was this, quirky guy. He would be a good guy to sit down and have a beer with, because he would either be crazy, entertaining, or crazy boring and would weird you out and make you want to leave. But I think it'd be worth the risk. He believed that he was a warrior spirit who was sent to Earth whenever there was a dramatic good versus evil conflict. And when that happened, his soul would take shape in a body, and he would do combat against true evil. And he actually writes a poem called Through the Glass and Darkly. He says, I fought many places and many guises, but always, always me. He would tell stories, well, when I was with Napoleon and we were retreating from Russia, this happened. They're like, well, George, you weren't there. He's like, well, yeah, I actually was. And, you know, people thought he was joking, but he wasn't. You know, he was with Carthage at Zarman. He was with Alexander the Great here. And that's who he was. And he said that he is going to go to Berlin and personally shoot Hitler. Hitler was a big believer in the occult, and he thought that him and Patton were somehow cosmically linked, destined to do battle. So, as Patton is jumped around the Mediterranean, large numbers of German troops were diverted to wherever Patton was sighted. He said, if there's a guy that's going to lead an attack, it's got to be him. And so Patton doesn't know it, but he's actually playing a role in the D-Day deception scheme. No one tells him, you know, Eisenhower's letting him stew. You're going to sit and you're going to learn your lesson, and you know, you're going to be a good boy if I ever bring you back into combat. He is supposedly leading the fictional First Army on the east coast of England that may attack northern France at the Pas de Calais. He has no idea of what his role is going to be because of the slap of the private down in Sicily. And now we have General Eisenhower, who's going to move his headquarters from England, and he's going to set up shop outside Bayeux in Normandy. He has now taken overall command of the Allied armies, taking that job away from Montgomery, who hates it. So here's Ike, you know, good old solid General Eisenhower. Here's Bradley, just, you know, one of those guys, the average Joe. You would see him in a crowd of guys and he wouldn't stand out, but, you know, a solid general. Here's Montgomery, being Montgomery. And then here's Patton, who was kind of tall and slender, and you envision that George C. Scott, you know, speech at the beginning of kind of that loud, gravelly voice. Well, Patton's was kind of high and kind of shrilly, and so every now and then, you know, he had this, didn't have that. It was kind of a raspy, quiet voice, not that big, booming, gravelly George C. Scott type of operation. These four guys, for the next year, are going to lock horns. Every single one of them believes they're right, and Eisenhower has got to deal with it. It's, you know, how to keep. And that's why Eisenhower was chosen for the job. Several other names were nominated to be the supreme head of the Allied Expeditionary Force, but they all said no, except for George C. Marshall, who was ordered not to go. All right. And each of the men that were you know, offered the job said, if it can't be you, who should it be? They all said the only one with the temperament and the diplomatic ability to handle and, you know, massage the egos is Eisenhower. So he gets the job. So it's now been 49 days since D-Day. Things are beginning to finally break loose. St. Lo is captured, all right? We were supposed to be there, best case scenario on D-Day, worst case scenario, June 11th. Well, we know it takes, you know, over almost 2 months. Con, finally, you know, the Panzer, you know, the 21st Panzer Division is beginning to weaken. They're running out of supplies and ammunition, and Montgomery is beginning to surge forward. And General Omar Bradley, now that he's out of St. Lo, says he sees a spot. I see a weakness. It can be exploited. It's time to unleash Patton and the massive reserves in manpower and equipment that we have. Because the Germans don't have reinforcements. Everything they lose, it cannot be replaced. And it's at this point in 1944 that the German army in France is very similar to the Japanese Navy after the Battle of Midway in 1942. When the 4 large Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk at Midway, they had no more offensive thrust. All they could do was defend, which they did tenaciously, but there was no hope of them ever striking back. Once a plane, a ship was destroyed, they couldn't get another one. Well, the German army in France is about that level. If a tank or a half-track or a car gets blown up, they're done. It's now time to get off and walk on foot. The main mode of German officer transportation in France at this time is a bicycle. Right? Every sergeant, every private could steal a Jeep in the U.S. Army. German officers are literally pedal around on a bicycle. Yet Hitler claimed they were the most mobile army on the face of the planet. You really ride a bike. I mean, come on. All right, so anyway. All right, here's American supplies. African American Services Supply Corps, they're stacking everything. Food, ammo, medical supplies, bridging material, out in the middle of a field. Not under cover of the trees, not under camouflage nets, but just in the middle of a field. The feeling of being, you know, the Luftwaffe is not going to come. We can move with impunity anywhere we want behind our front line. Let's now take this stuff and let's unleash it on the German army. And chronicling all this is Ernie Pyle, Stars and Stripes news reporter who was very close to General Leslie McNair during Operation Cobra. And he said he had never felt anything like this. He said, all of a sudden, the rocks and the gravel began to shake. And you felt it in your body before you heard it, this hum, this roar. He goes, it sounded, it was a doom-like sound, like the end of the world is upon us. And all of a sudden, the bombs started to rain and drop down and blow things up. And he said it took him days. His muscles were so taut after the explosion. His body was sore from just standing and watching from a half-mile away. Because I can't imagine what would it have been like for a German soldier. I'm sore, and I just stood and watched. And the American 4th Armored Division was told, as soon as the last bomb falls, even if there are shorts, even if we're hit, there's only 2 of you left, go and attack. Drive into them and let them have it. And this effect is devastating to the Germans on the St. Lo to Perrier Road. Everything, large equipment, 56-ton Tiger tank. I mean, this is a large piece of equipment. It's almost as big as our modern Abrams tanks, blown aside. Things buried in the mud and the dirt. See German soldiers walking with their hands on their hips. This guy over here doesn't even have a weapon. He's got a clipboard and his hand on his hip, just watching. The front lines of the German army, the very best soldiers they had left, are just destroyed. So, General von Kluge calls his sub-commander, General Lehr, and says, you will not move from that road. You will hold that road to the last man. That's what the Fuhrer wants. That's what he is going to get. And Lehr radios back, no problem. Don't worry, my men will not leave their posts. They are not going to leave because they're all dead. Panzer Lehr is destroyed. And it's kind of funny, but he's like, oh, don't worry, they're not going. Panzer Lehr had been fighting since North Africa. All right? Some of them were veterans of invading Poland in '39. These were like seasoned veterans. These guys knew what their job was. When Panzer Lehr is gone, that's a heavy blow. This is the best that the Germans have in Western Europe at this time. So finally on the 27th, using what Alexander the Great coined way back, centuries, millenniums ago, what the Germans called Blitzkrieg, massing, all your weapons, combined arms support, your air power, your artillery, your tanks, and your infantry on one point and burst through and fan out behind it. Once you get through their strong point, once you get through their defenses and you're behind them in the rear, what do they have? You can pretty much do whatever you want. We finally widen this gap. We finally figure that out, and it's going to devastate the Germans. From this point, going back to World War I, going back to Ambrose Burnside attacking Fredericksburg in the Civil War and George Pickett at Gettysburg, the idea was a broad front. Move like a snowplow. Attack the enemy all along his front line. Well, that's just not going to work anymore. And so kind of unwittingly, without thinking about it, we weren't trained to do it. We figured it out. Had we studied what the Germans had done all the way back to the Spanish Civil War, we might have done it sooner, but Panzer Lehr is gone. And now we're in this wide open, flat country of France, in the beautiful farmland of France, going down to the chateaus on the Loire Valley. And a lot is talked about our Sherman tank. It was small, has like a 75 millimeter cannon. You know, it explodes very easily. If you've seen Fury, it takes 3 to 4 Shermans to take out a German tank, and all that is true. We had a bigger tank called a Pershing, but the idea that we came up with was speed and numbers. Right? We want a tank that can travel rapidly, a lightly armored tank that will gobble up ground. So we go with the Sherman, figuring to fight out in the open where we can run circles around the more heavy, lumbering Panthers and Tigers. A Sherman weighs 32 tons, a Panther 44, I'll show you in a couple weeks, a Tiger 56. They're huge, but they're only so maneuverable. We figured numbers and speed will make up for the size differential. And that is a debate, depending on what side you're on. I don't know that there is a good answer to did we make the right call or not. But now we're in the wide open. This is what we've trained for. This is where our speed is going to pay dividends. And finally, the real most mobile army is going to get a chance to show its stuff. Not guys riding bicycles, but tanks, jeeps, half-tracks, tank destroyers. An unbelievable amount and array of firepower is about to be unleashed on Hitler's retreating army. So, problem is, now we got to go from strategic to tactical. We're there, strategy's working. Now we've got 3 armies. Who gets the gasoline? Who gets the ammunition? We got a lot, but we can't give it to 3 armies. 400,000 gallons of gas a day per army. We got a lot, but it's hard to get 12,000, or no, yeah, 400,000, 800,000, 1,200,000 gallons of gasoline. Now I'm using my lottery math. I'm still devastated. All right. We don't have that much. And so here comes George Patton. And Patton is that guy. He's got all kinds of crazy stories, from being reincarnated to combat true evil, and he does things that he slaps at the soldier, and he's this scrappy guy. He's ultra rich. All right, his families are old Virginia aristocracy who moved to California. They've got a big horse ranch. He's so independently wealthy that for a small time in North Africa, he was using his own money ordering parts for his tanks out of the Sears catalog. A lot of the other officers didn't like him because he and his wife would have a nice house while they were living in little crappy tar paper shacks. But earlier in his career, he convinces General Pershing to take him to Mexico to hunt Pancho Villa. He gets into an old gun battle and shoots a couple Pancho Villa's lieutenants. He goes into World War I and begins to pilot tanks, and he's wounded. And he stays in France. He loved France, big Francophile, spoke the language fluently, and he wants to attend Sandhurst in England and the French Military Academy. And while he's there, he picks up a couple hobbies. He learns how to fly, and he would fly all over France, and he would land, and he would make these elaborate maps. And he actually bought a barn and big sheets of poster paper, and he laid out maps on the ground, where in his spare time, he would stand there and just study them. And guys like, George, what in God's name are you doing? Well, I'm looking at my maps. Well, what for? He's like, well, there is going to come a time where there will be another war in Europe, and if it happens in France, I want to know where I'm going. Are you kidding me? World War I's over. We're never going to have another one of these. He's like, well, just in case, I'm going to have my maps ready. So he flew over France. He rented a car, and he and his wife drove around. He would go on top of high points and make little sketches. All right, go down the dirt road. You'll see, a white silo by the Hogan farm. Turn right, there's an old stone Roman bridge that'll hold a tank. People are like, George, you're never going to need to know this. He's like, well, just in case we do, I'm going to. And before the invasion of Africa and before the invasion of Sicily, Patton gives a speech. He liked to get his guys fired up, and he liked to say that if he gave it to them loud and salty, they would remember it. And so right before his men attack in Normandy, he takes his different versions of the speeches and he puts them together in the famous, the George C. Scott speech, where he walks into a room and says, "Gentlemen, I'm your new, commanding officer," and everyone knows who he is. "So I want you to remember something." He goes, "No dumb idiot," substituting words here, "ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb idiot die for his country." And I want you guys to remember this. There's been a lot of talk about America wanting to stay out of the war, America not wanting to fight. He goes, that is not true. Traditionally, Americans love to fight. Real Americans love the sting of battle. Think about it. Back when you were kids, you liked the champion marble shooter, the big league ball player, the fastest runner, the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner. We play to win all the time. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed, because simply the idea of losing is hateful to an American. That is why we have not lost, nor will we ever lose a war. Can you imagine being like 18, 20 years old, listening to this? Up there, spit and polish, chest full of medals, walking around with his pistols, just, letting her fly. He goes, now, the stuff that you've heard, let me tell you right now, an army is a team. We eat, we sleep, we fight as a team. This individuality stuff is a load of crap. Guys who wrote that for the Saturday Evening Post have no idea what they're talking about. We're going into France. We are going to liberate France, and we are going to destroy what he called the lousy Hun army. He goes, we have been given the finest food and equipment. We've got the best spirit and morale, and the best men in the world. He goes, I actually pity the soldiers we're going up against. By God, he goes, I actually do. He goes, we're not just going to shoot them. We're going to cut out their living guts, and we're going to use them to grease the tracks of our tanks. Yeah, exactly. Like, what? Yeah, really? He goes, now, I know some of you are wondering whether you're going to chicken out under fire. It's like, don't worry about it. I know that you will do your duty. The Nazi is the enemy. Wade into them, spill their blood, shoot them in the belly. When you put your hand into a pile of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do. And lastly, I don't want to get any messages that we're holding on to anything. We're advancing constantly. We're not going to hold on to something. We're going to let the Hun do that. Matter of fact, the only thing I want to grab a hold of is the enemy. I want to hold him by the nose. I want to kick him in the butt. I want to kick the crap out of him all the way to Berlin. He goes, now, gentlemen, 30 years from now, when your grandchild asks you, Grandpa, what'd you do in the Great World War II, you won't have to say, I shoveled manure in Louisiana. Now you know how I feel. Tomorrow we're going into combat. Dismissed. And he walks out of the room. And I would really like to go back in a time machine and be in that room when he took all three of his speeches, put them together, and it had to be hysterical or like, dude, I'm ready, let's go. All right, this is going to be awesome. We got this nutball, this is going to be fantastic. All right, so the roadway is open, and Patton gets into the battle. He comes off the Atlantic coast. He'd been in Normandy watching things. And all of a sudden, he's attacking in all four directions. He's going north, south, east, and west. They're going, George, what are you supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be going and liberating the ports on the Brittany coast. He's like, the hell with Brittany. All right, that's west. The enemy's east. I'm going that way. No, George, you can't. And he's got a few little tricks cooked up his sleeve that he's going to use to make that happen. And as Patton enters, that's the straw that breaks the German army's back. They begin to retreat. And as Patton's tanks maul them by day, here's where the speed of the Sherman tank pays off. It moved so far, so fast, 25, 50 miles a day, the Germans couldn't retreat fast enough. And when Patton's tanks weren't on them, the Army Air Force was pulverizing them from the air, to a point where the German army could only move at night. Then they had to run without headlights. During the day, they had to pull their vehicles into a wooded area, and if there weren't woods nearby, the German soldiers got out and started hoofing it, because they knew if the spotter plane saw a column of enemy tanks, Patton and the Air Force was going to be on them. So now it's a foot race. And the American GI was ecstatic. You can see they're all looking up, smiling. Ah, this is awesome, all right? We don't have to worry about the Luftwaffe. The Germans do. And Patton's tanks are zipping through. As some guys ran out of gas, they pulled off the side of the road and let their buddies move ahead. And they just kept leapfrogging each other, chewing up German unit after German unit. And so, we start at St. Lo. We're going to go down here, and this is the area that's going to cause a big problem. This is Avranches right here, and down the coast is the big port of St. Malo. Big famous landmark in St. Malo is the famous city of Mont Saint Michel, the city that has never been breached off the coast. And this little town of Moritan right here. Patton's tanks come south. They're supposed to go over here and liberate the two ports of Lorient and Brest. And Patton's like, well, who cares? We can open those ports, but the fight's over here. By the time we open those ports, it won't matter. So he began shifting 2/3 of his army this way. And there's going to be a last desperate gamble where Hitler's going to try and counterattack right around this town of Moritan. And it becomes a famous battle known as Hill 314. So when we get there, it'll make more sense. Panzer Grenadier, seasoned veteran, Helmut Gunther said, back in the Eastern Front, when we had to retreat from Moscow during the nasty winter, we fell back in good order. We were good. Many of the Germans were from the same towns and villages. They knew each other. They looked after each other. You don't want to go home and tell your buddy's wife that he died because you left him behind. So we were cohesive. We retreated, but we stayed intact. He goes, now, after St. Lo, you didn't know anybody. All right, you didn't recognize you didn't know if they were alive or dead or where they were through the night. You just kept moving. It turns into a retreat, every man for himself. And when in doubt, a lot of guys just en masse surrendered. So it wasn't uncommon to see a couple of sticks in the ground and barbed wire wrapped around a circle and one guy guarding a couple hundred surrendered German soldiers. You got 8 shots, all right? 8 of you may get it. The rest of you are going to get away. But the Germans at this point were exhausted. They're walking up. See, this guy's popping out of the woods, and there's a Fallschirmjäger paratroopers walking down the road saying, you know, that's it. I have had enough. And so the plan. The Allies are moving. British and Canadians are coming, you know, towards the southeast, trying to attack towards Paris. Patton, and keep in mind, he's been in trouble. So he wants to really let loose, but he can only say so much. He's afraid for his job. He goes, the heck with, you know, Brest and Lorient, who cares? Let me swing south, come around behind him, and I'll tie the noose around the neck of every retreating German soldier. We'll cut them off. We'll surround them. We got this. We'll end the war right here. However, Bradley and Eisenhower said, George, we just can't do that. He says, well, why not? Well, we got to go to the Atlantic and get the ports. And what about your flanks? You know, the Germans can attack you. He's like, the heck with my flanks. Let the air power worry about that. If we defeat the German army, I won't have to worry about my supply line and my flanks. You give me what I need. It's over. They're retreating. Let's encircle them. We got it. No, George. You might outrun your supply, but we'll get gas. All right? And his famous line that comes up later, where a truck full of food comes up, and he's on the phone with Bradley and says, Brad, by God, I asked for gas, and this idiot's bringing me bread. He's like, well, you guys are hungry. He goes, I'm going to shoot the next SOB that pulls up with food. We'll eat our belts. I need gas. All right, so, all right. And it makes it, if we win, my flanks aren't going to matter. There's no one south of me. I got this. And they say, no, stick to the plan. And this is where, in hindsight, and Eisenhower realized this in his, when he's, after his presidency, and he writes his memoirs with Stephen Ambrose, a famous author. Eisenhower and Bradley were given this tremendous amount of manpower and equipment. I might have said this last week. One of the greatest things the American Republic has ever done is December 6th, we had 170,000 people in the armed forces. At this point, we've got 7.2 million. We outfitted not only our army, but we supplied the British and even the Russians. We shipped it across 2 theaters, across the Atlantic and the vastness of the Pacific. The United States outproduces all other warring countries combined. It's astounding. And the way to mentally picture that is up to December 6th, it took 6 months to build a battleship like the USS Arizona or the North Carolina down in Wilmington. December 7th, there were 186 ships in the American Pacific Fleet, right, and the 3 aircraft carriers, so 190. September 2nd, 1945, there were 4,300 ships in the United States Pacific Fleet. 4,300. And that was just one of our 5 naval fleets. The United States Pacific Fleet outnumbered all the other navies in the world. So we went from 190 to 4,300. It took 30 days to build a battleship. Incredible, just simply incredible. But guns and ships and planes are inanimate objects. It's the human factor that makes them work. And Eisenhower and Bradley have got an enormous supply of them. However, when it came time to it, when it came time to unleash all this, they kind of balked. They choked. They played the safe route, which sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. But back in the Civil War, we just talked about it today. Where is Ron? There you are, all right? General Grant tells Abraham Lincoln and his soldiers, look, it's simple, it's math. We've got more than they do. I can get you guys supplied, I can get you fed, I can get you rest. Robert E. Lee can't do that. If we make him fight all day, every day, we're going to grind him down and we're going to win. And his big quote is, even if it costs us half the army, we're going to win. He might have been boasting a little bit. He gets into a lot of trouble, but he's right. And Patton is like, unleash it. We got this. It's time to strike now. Everything we've been waiting for, they're on the run, they're in the open, they're unorganized. Now's the time to hit them with everything we have. But the decision is to get the 2 ports. Patton keeps saying they're in the west. That doesn't matter. Germany's in the east. We've got to get them before they get over the Seine River back into Germany. And everyone thinks he's crazy. There's no way they're going to get to the Seine. We've got this. And Patton writes in his diary, the only place he could really be honest, he tells his wife and himself, I'm nauseated by this. The war could be over right here in the summertime. And Eisenhower says this all the time, plans are great until you go into battle and then throw them out. And Eisenhower realizes this back in North Africa. He gets in one battle near the Kasserine Pass, and he's like an engineer. A goes to B, and B goes to C. And in the battle, things didn't go that way, and he didn't know what to do. So he wisely steps out of the combat arena and says, I'm an administrator. I can form the strategy, but in the ebb and flow and chaos of combat, I can't do it. That's where he goes and hires Patton. So Patton uses Eisenhower stuff again. You say this all the time. Plans are great until we start fighting, and then you got to just, you got to throw that stuff out and roll with it. Even Patton's bitter enemy, Montgomery, agrees with him. Now, when these two guys agree on anything, you should probably stop and listen, because they hate each other. So if they have any common ground, you might want to, perk up and pay attention to it. Patton and Montgomery want to knock the Germans out. Eisenhower and Bradley just want to push them off balance. Patton's argument and Montgomery's argument is they're already off balance, finish them. We know later that St. Malo won't be used as a port until the end of the war, until the spring of 45. Brest can never be used until late September because of the destructions the German cause on the harbor. So we get them, but we still can't use them. It turns out to be a waste of time, men, and material. And so here is St. Malo. It's a cute little town. If you go there today, it looks relatively the same. And if you keep going, what would be to your left, you get Mont Saint-Michel. That is how it looks right now, a couple years ago. I tried to line it up, but I like this photo. There's two GIs standing there, looking at it, hanging out, because it was off limits to enlisted troops. Only officers could go out to the famous medieval fortress city. I'm thinking, God, they would have really had a hard time keeping me out of there. If you look at this, the old medieval part, directly across from it is St. Malo. So it's beautiful, and it's great, but if we go back, it's not that big. How many troops and men and pieces of equipment and tons of gasoline? It's great for a vacation, all right? It's great to get some Calvados and be like, man, this is pretty, but you're not going to bring in a ton of equipment in the port of St. Malo. So anyway, that's my own opinion. But if you've ever been there, that's about it. So anyway, Patton writes, in the meantime, I'm having the loveliest little war, attacking in 4 directions. But he knows he can only spread himself so thin. So he only diverts 1/3 of his army to Brittany, and 2/3 he subtly shifts eastward. And he uses a trick that he calls the old stone soup. Like, the old baker has got a pot of water and a stone, and we just talked about it, and he goes up to a door and says, hey ma'am, I'm making some stone soup. Do you have any pepper or salt? And the lady says, yeah, here you go. And another guy throws in onions and carrots. Well, Patton had this little thing where he would say, hey, spotted some German tanks in the area near Le Mans. Request that I send out a reconnaissance unit. Army protocol, you cannot deny that. He goes, guys, when you get to Le Mans, you scream and holler and you start shooting stuff and say, oh my God, large numbers of Germans are in Le Mans, need reinforcements. And they drive to Le Mans, oh my God, there are Germans everywhere, oh my God, we need help. Oh, I'll request permission to reinforce my guys. Oh yes, go Georgia. They all rush up there. Okay guys, now you're going to go to Chambois. You're going to get there and you're going to scream and holler that there are Germans everywhere. And so that's how he kind of inchworms his way on west. And the other thing, he starts running off the maps. And they're like, George, how could you be near Le Mans? There are no roads that way. All the big bridges across the Veer River are destroyed or the Germans got them. And Patton's like, well, if you go by the old Lake Hogan silo, down the road, there's an old Roman bridge that can support a tank. The maps that he made back in 1918, 20, and 21, he still remembered. He goes, I don't need your maps. I'm the map. I know where I'm going. Well, George, we don't have like that bridge. Don't worry about it. It's there. Listen to me, and I'll talk you through. And so his knowledge of the area and his little stone soup philosophy allows him to move across France. So it's at this point where his exploits become truly legendary. George, in late July, August, and first half of September, will carve 2/3 of France. He will kill and capture more Germans than any other single army during the entire war. His men move with speed. He goes, you're going to be tired, you're going to be exhausted, but remember, I'll get you food, I'll get you rest. The Germans don't have that luxury. It's what Grant said all over again near the end of the Civil War. Hitler sees this, and 2 Pattons back is the little port of Avranches, or however you say that in French, and behind him are more hedgerows. And Hitler has now taken over control of the army. He will not listen to his generals whatsoever. He is the megalomaniac keeping an eye on everything. And he goes, if we turn the army around and slam Patton back into the peninsula, back into the hedgerows, we will be able to reestablish ourselves and we won't have to give up Paris. All of his generals say, are you crazy? That's not going to work. We need to pull our guys back, get them over a couple rivers, and get ready to defend. This is never going to work. And Hitler's like, well, that's why I can't trust you. You're all defeatists. Get out of here before I have you all shot. And so, the army turns around and they take off. And where they want to go, to their right, to the east is the Lehr River. To their left is the Atlantic Ocean, and there's these big, like, foothills, bluffs on either side, about 10 miles apart. Then there's a little narrow, like, valley. And in that valley begin, like, wine vineyards and hedgerows. And it's relatively flat, except for right smack dab in the middle of it is a little town of Mortain. And in Mortain, there's one hill. It sticks out like a sore thumb, kind of like a mushroom or a cupcake, or like Pilot Mountain out in Winston-Salem. A smaller, more gradual incline on Pilot Mountain is the hill of Mortain, called Hill 314. American soldiers climb atop it because it's a gorgeous view. You can see out to the seacoast on one side, the pretty valley on the other, and you can see 4 miles. And they were digging in up there, the United States 30th Infantry Division, and there's 700 guys up there. 4 miles behind them is the American artillery. And coming around the corner, around one of these big bluffs, is a group of Panzer tanks. And they're like, oh crap, where'd they come from? They're supposed to be retreating. And they're SS, and they're being led by a guy named Heinz Gudrun Jr. Heinz's dad came up with the idea of blitzkrieg back in the 1930s. So this is like an A game. They're like, oh my God, where did he go? And on top was little Lieutenant Robert Weiss. And he climbs up on these rocks with the German machine gunner shooting at him, and he grabs a radio. He only has 1 radio and 3 batteries. And he goes, this turns into a cowboy quick draw contest. The Germans started coming at me from all 3 sides. So this is north. The green box is where the artillery was. South, west, and east. This is Hill 314, right smack dab in the middle. Weiss had to turn and call in accurate artillery fire because he was being hit simultaneously. He had to shoot a fire mission, readjust, and call in accurate coordinates constantly while being shot at. He only has 3 batteries. When one would begin to weaken, he would take it out, and they built a bunch of flat rocks directly in the sun. He would lay the battery out in the sun to try and warm it and put the other battery in. He and his men have hand grenades and rifles. That's it. The battle for Hill 314 rages for 5 days. Guys are getting wounded and killed. The artillery try and use hollowed out shells full of blood plasma and try and get food and water up to the guys. But every time the shell hits, everything inside is ruined. At the end of the 5 days, for the last 48 to 72 hours, Weiss and his men didn't eat or drink anything. He was up there constantly, correct right, 300 yards, fire for effect, and then switched to the other one. He had a little map in front of him. By the end, he said he didn't need it. He had picked out landmarks in his mind and was calling down mission after mission after mission. The artillery guys said they were getting tired. They go, but we knew as tired as we were, Weiss and his men had it 10 times as bad. When it's all done, 300 of the 700 are wounded or killed, 275 are wounded. In the 5 days, Weiss calls out 193 successful fire missions, blunting the SS Panzer attack on Hill 314. At the same time, word gets around that Patton had moved eastward. He had captured the famous town of Le Mans, and von Kluge and his men knew there was nowhere to retreat. The only way to do it was to swing way to the south, try and get underneath Patton, and run to the Seine River. To get east of the Seine River, which is below Paris. If we can do that, we can survive. If not, we're all dead. As von Kluge gives that order to retreat, Hitler fires him, says, "Come home to stand trial for my assassination." Von Kluge takes the cyanide capsules and kills himself, and he's dead. He's buried in Normandy, France, to this day. Battle for France is just about over, but a few things are left undone. This guy, Helmut Ridgen, says, you know, as the war turned mobile, as we're going across France, from our experience in Poland and Russia, we should have been good at this. We should have been able to get out of there. He goes, but our equipment began to break down. We were running out of gas. We had no spare parts. And as we were rushing to get out of there, Patton was always at our heels. Or we would hear a P-47 coming down about 100 feet and just opening up on us. 1,200 pounds of bombs and 850 caliber machine guns will do a lot of damage. When you can fly back and forth like you're mowing grass without getting worried about getting shot at, P-47 pilots had a great time. He goes, some of the guys just sat down and said, we're done, all right? It's over, forget about it. Same time, way down in the south of France, in Marseille, General Lucien Trescott, an old Patton prodigy, lands with Operation Dragoon. He attacks northward, captures the Calabrist government, the Vichy French, and old French World War I hero Henry Patton will be kicked out of the government. He will be sent to Germany. He will come home to stand trial as a traitor of France, where he will be hanged after the war in 1947. When the Vichy French fell, just a breath of optimism, a feeling that the war is about to be over, goes through the entire Allied army. And Eisenhower says, our zeal, our determination, and our speed have led to a fateful, destructive week for the Nazi regime. We're going to win this. At a press conference, the reporters start asking him, General, how soon until the war is over? Do you expect them to surrender? And Eisenhower says, you know, it's not going to be over until Hitler's dead. When I see his body, I will think the thing is about to end. Most people are beginning to bet that the army will be done in Europe by October, November at the latest. An air operation called Operation Rankin to drop paratroopers on Berlin is being dreamt up, and guys begin to make plans to divert the American armies in Europe over to the Pacific. Everyone sees light at the end of the tunnel, except our good friend Patton. His job's not done yet. Now, straight south of Caen to the north, Paris just to the east, and come to this rolling hills, kind of like foot.